G'day everybody. As a bit of a sports fan, I mean I like all sports from all across the globe, even though I'm located here in Melbourne, Australia. Noticed some news that has been around for a little while now is the fact that the NBA television ratings are down in the United States by 48% since 2012. This is a huge decline, like a noticeable decline, when other sports haven't had similar decreases. In fact, a lot of other sports have gone up. And the question is, why is this? I mean, a lot of us, like me, grew up with, Michael Jordan back in the 1990s, and obviously when you've got a superstar player like that, there are reasons why, in such an individual-based sport, you would get, a lot of focus on it. But why has it declined by 48%? This is a massive decline. A lot of people speculating it's things like, the way the game is refereed. Also other people speculating about the tactics. Everyone goes for the 3-point shot now. Things like that, which some say makes the game less attractive. That doesn't bother me. I don't think that's the reason. I mean, that doesn't explain, a 48% decline. I think the reason is, and this reason has been mentioned, but there's a deeper thing that needs to be discussed as well. The reason I think is the load management, which has only come in relatively recently, not so much the last few years, but in the last decade or so, where players have been rested during the season regularly, not playing back-to-back games, which tells everybody the games are not important. And this is not necessarily new. The NBA have brought in things to try to counter load management, penalties and things like that. But the problem is really, why does the load management occur? Why do they rest players? And the elephant in the room, the thing that nobody really seems to talk about, is something that has been around for 6 decades, is the fact that the NBA has an 82 game schedule. Now you bring this up and it would be a massive cultural change to reduce the number of games in the NBA. It's been that way since before I was born. But this isn't when you think about it, this is an absurdly large amount of games in a sport where the best team normally wins. If you look at the other North American sports, I mean, baseball have 162 games, but it's a bit of a fluky sport. If you look at the win-loss record of the best team in baseball, they often win not much more than 60% of their games. Teams in basketball are capable of winning 80% of the games and more. A couple of teams have won 70 games or more in an 82 game schedule, which begs the question, why do you need an 82 game schedule in a sport where the best team normally wins? Now the answer is probably an economic reason. They want to sell out stadiums, and I understand that. And that's a valid reason, that's a valid argument. The problem is that 82 game schedule wasn't really a problem for 5 decades. The reason is probably maybe wasn't quite as professional, and there wasn't as much of a focus on analytics. Now, something went off with the owners, the managers and the coaches probably a decade, or maybe even a little less than a decade ago, where they realised that, hang on a minute, we can rest players and it won't really make much difference. There's so many games that it doesn't really matter. We can make the playoffs anyway. What difference does it make? And once one team started doing it and they got wind of this, then everyone started doing it. And that didn't used to happen. Back when I used to watch it in the 90s, everyone, barring injury, players would play every game. But once one team started to, introduce load management, everyone introduces it. Now everybody does it, and it sends a message that the games don't matter. They're not important. There's 82 of them. Well, if you lose one, so what? There's 81 more to go. Big deal. And really, the 82 game schedule causes this. I mean, if you're in a sport where the best team normally wins, and you're one of the best teams at the moment, like OKC, for example, or Denver, or Boston, or Cleveland, you're going to make the playoffs. What motivation is there to play your best team every week? So I think this is the reason. And I think if you look at other basketball leagues around the world, I know they're not always comparable because the NBA is a much higher standard and frankly just a better competition. Here in Australia, we have a 29 game basketball season. Other leagues often have no more than 40. And this also affects, teams that are trying to get into the playoffs. If you look before the play-in tournament was introduced and it was just a regular, 8 teams make it in each conference, you've got more than half the teams making the playoffs. So you've got this 82 game schedule where more than half the teams make the playoffs, and there's no real difference between the top seed and the 8th seed. Now you could say, well, there is a difference when you've got a home court advantage and you get to play the worst team, but just think about it for a moment. I mean, even if you're the 8th seed, and I'm talking before the play-in thing was introduced, even if you're the 8th seed, you say, well, you haven't got home court advantage. Well, you still get 3 games at home. It's not like a best of 7 series, you're on the road every game. The first 6 games are 3-3, not in that order, but the first 6 games are 3-3. The home court advantage only matters if it goes to a game 7. And about 20 to 25% of all series go to a game 7. So if it doesn't go to a game 7, and most series won't, the home court advantage doesn't matter. Even the lowest seeded team still gets 3 games at home. So even playing for home court advantage doesn't really matter, because even if you're the worst team, you're still going to get 3 games at home in a 7-game series. So what's the point in trying to achieve a higher seed? It doesn't really matter. I think all the teams really care about is just winning enough games to make the playoffs and making sure that the players are fit and playing well when they get there. Whether they win 44 games or 62 doesn't matter. And what difference does it make? In every playoff series that you play, you're going to get at least 3 games at home no matter what. And sure, you might not get a game 7 at home, but most times it doesn't go to a game 7. So I think people have started to sort of, when analysing the analytics a bit more deeply, have started to realise that, the large amount of games in a sport where the best team normally wins doesn't really matter. And the solution obviously would be to, I think it's quite a radical suggestion, and it would be quite controversial, and some of you may disagree, but I would halve the amount of games. I know that sounds radical, but that's only 82 games in basketball. A sport where the best team normally wins. 82 games? Really, it's more than that. It's 100. It can be up to 110 if you get to the NBA Finals. 110 games. I mean, no wonder they're resting players. And 110 after an 82 game season, they then have 4 best of 7 playoff series. So they all talk about load management being the issue, which of course it is, but they don't talk about the underlying reason why load management is the issue. Load management is the issue because of the ridiculous amount of games these players are expected to play in a sport where you don't really need that many games to determine who the best team is. Like I said, you do perhaps in baseball, the other big North American sport, because it's kind of a bit more fluky, but you certainly don't in basketball. And no one talks about this. They talk about the load management, but they don't talk about the 82 game schedule, probably because it's so culturally ingrained in the game. And I get that. I mean, people are just used to it. I mean, it's sacrilege. You couldn't change it to 82 game schedule. It's just like, it'd be like shooting Bambi. I mean, you just can't make such a big change. But of course, if you did that, it might mean a hit for the television rights. But of course, what would happen is that more people would watch. The games would be more important. You would not get players being rested, that's for sure. If you had a 42 game schedule, you would not have players getting rested. Players would play every single game, and the games would be important. I also wouldn't have best of 7. I'd have best of 3 and have the finals be best of 5. Some might not like that, but put more on the line. Make the games more important. At least then, if you have a best of 3 series, as controversial as that may sound, with a shorter season, then the home court advantage, there's more likely that the home court advantage is useful, because there's a reasonably high probability of it going to a 3rd game. There's a very, very low probability of it going to a 7th game, in which case that is the only case home court advantage matters. Like I said, the first 6 games are 3-3. So I think this is something that doesn't get mentioned in the NBA, is with the load management, but why? Why is load management an issue? And it is quite simply the 82 game schedule. and it's been that way for a long time. And you know, it'll probably never change because of economic reasons. They want to sell out stadiums. They want to do that. But I mean, in a perfect world, you know, I'd halve the amount of games. The games would be so much more important means higher ratings. I'd actually reduce the amount of playoff games as well. Like I said, probably have best of 3. Maybe you could sell me on best of 5. But that could still mean well over 50 games that teams play during a year, which is a lot. So I just thought it was, you know, people are talking about the underlying reason for the decline in the ratings and talking about the load management, but really they're not talking about why the load management occurs. And if you play an absurdly large amount of games in a sport that doesn't need that many games because the best team normally wins, then you're going to get this. You're going to get teams being rested. And of course, that leads to other problems. It leads to perceptions from fans that the players don't really care about individual games. Because why would you? You're resting half the team. You're resting, in some cases, the entire starting 5. And that sends a really bad message, of course. But you've got to look at the underlying motivation for the teams. Right? The motivation. There is zero motivation for a team in an 82-game schedule who's going to be well up in the, you know, towards the top seeds in either the Western or the Eastern Conference, to risk playing their players in every game. There's just zero. And as I mentioned earlier, it's not even really worth trying to get a higher seed. What's the point? You know, what's the point? Even if you get a lower seed, you're still going to get 3 games at home. You know, which is why I think that, in my opinion, controversially, and that's fine, I'm happy you come at me if you disagree, but controversially, I would reduce the playoffs. You know, at least then home court advantage would matter more if it was best of 3, because, you know, 2/3 of the games would be at one team's home court rather than 4 out of 7, which is much closer to 50-50. So I think this is interesting. I think people are talking about the wrong thing. I think people are talking about the load management being an issue, which causes, you know, people to, you know, the perception of disrespect and the fact that, you know, the perception that games don't matter. And it does have that perception, yes, but why do teams do this? Why do they do it? Yeah, of course, you ask, well, why didn't they do this 60 years ago? Well, like I said, it only took someone to start, and then everyone follows, and once they get wind of the analytics and you see some team resting players, you think, well, I want to rest players as well. You know, why do they get the advantage of resting players? And then everyone starts to do it. And that's what's happened. Everyone does it now. And if you've got a percent, there's nothing worse in a sport. There's nothing that will turn people off more than watching a sport where the implication is the games don't matter. And that's the implication. The implication is that the games don't matter. That's what you get when the teams rest players. But whilst the NBA like to blame the players, I say don't rest players, and they want to penalise them and put things in place, which they did at the start of either last season or the season before. They really need to look at the reasons why teams are doing this in the first place. And look, it might be futile because, of course, you know, people want to sell out stadiums for all those 80 games, 41 home games. But the reality is that load management will be with the NBA forever now. You can't get rid of it. You put penalties in place. At the end of the day, as long as you play an 82-game season, teams are going to want to rest players. It will. And the only way you can really solve this issue, which would increase the television ratings, is to reduce the amount of games. You can put penalties in place. You can keep the 82-game schedule and put penalties in place for players. You can do whatever you want. But at the end of the day, it won't change the fact that the analytics guys look at the matches and they say, well, it doesn't matter if we don't win this match. It's not relevant. We've got 81 other games to go if we don't win this one. It's not important. You know, we're happy to rest players on this second leg of a back-to-back, or rest a key player here or there. That wouldn't happen in a shorter season. It just wouldn't happen. And I reckon people really need to start looking at the reasons, the underlying reasons of why, instead of blaming the teams, who are obviously going to do this. I mean, you play an 82 game season, of course they're going to rest players. Even if they didn't 50 years ago and 30 years ago, the fact that they do now, a bit more professional, more analytical in the way they look at the game, the fact is they do it now. They might not have done it in the past, but that doesn't matter. They do it now, and that's the problem. They do it now, and if they do it now, then the cat's out of the bag. It's going to be with the NBA forever. So the only way they can do something about it, the only way, is to, in my opinion, reduce the amount of games. Probably will never happen because of the economic reasons, I get that. But I can't see an increase in the television ratings in an era that will be with us probably forever, where teams will rest players with load management. And that's not going away. And they brought in the in-season tournament to give more meaning, because the season's so damn long. The season's 82 games, so they brought in that in-season tournament to give some meaning to the early season games, because everyone knows the games don't really matter. But even that was brought in. When you think about it, why was it brought in? What's the underlying reason? The underlying reason is because players and teams don't care so much about the individual games, which is because of the 82 game schedule. Every problem, when you think about it, can be attributed back to that. And no one talks about it, probably because it won't change, and it might not. And it might not change. You know, but if you had a season that was half that long, well, you wouldn't need load management. You wouldn't need an in-season tournament. You probably wouldn't need best of 7. You know, in playoffs, you could probably get by with best of 3 or best of 5. And yeah. So anyway, what do you guys think? Just thought I'd talk a bit about the NBA. We've, follow it quite closely. I'm a professional gambler by trade, and I make about 30% of my income from betting off the NBA. So it is something I follow quite closely. And from a purely biased point of view, I think the more games the better for me. The more games you can bet on, the more games I can make money on. And you can certainly take advantage in the odds when key players are missing, which is one of the best ways to make money, by the way. Hint, hint. But yeah, so what do you guys think? Well, if you like this video and you like the content that I provide, please consider subscribing to the channel. About 90% of the people that watch these videos are not subscribed, so if you don't mind, it would be really good if you could just press the little subscribe button. I'd really appreciate it. And as always, have a great day.